Gemma Flame of Pleasure is all about clear speed, and so why not pair that with a skill that does really good single target, and provides an amusing amount of visual clutter. By that, I mean Arrow Einherjar. This felt like the natural evolution or next step from my starting build, which focused on the Flame Core Sentry. Not only does Arrow Einherjar clear much faster, especially with a few bits of tech that I'll talk about soon, but it also does way more damage, allowing me to smoothly and quickly farm T8, take down bosses, and much, much more. And so today, I'm going to be talking about the build that I've been playing on Gemma Flame of Pleasure pretty much since the start of the season. It's taken quite a journey to get here, there's been a lot of refinement and testing, but I'm happy with the end result and finally wanted to share it. If you find videos like this useful, then do be sure to get subscribed for more, and do be sure to leave a like while you're down there, because that's a great way to tell both me and the YouTube algorithm this is something you enjoy and want to see more of. But for now, let's start by talking about the key mechanics. Number 1, Gemma Flame of Pleasure. She uses the branding and death by fire mechanics to rapidly spread damage across the screen. As enemies enter my purgatory, they're immediately branded. When they're then killed, or at fixed intervals, the brand is removed, triggering death by fire, which is AoE damage. If you've ever played Penance Brand in Path of Exile, this largely works the same. And because of a hero memory that scales the number of enemies branded based on my AoE, I've had zero problems clearing out everything almost instantly. Because I knew clear speed was pretty much built in, I needed to fix single target damage, and I did that by happenstance. See, early on when I was farming, I got a Divine Ember Drop. This is the helmet that gives you damage based on your maximum life and tenacity blessings. So I decided to take advantage of a new crafting system, and by the way, if you want to learn how to craft in Torchlight Infinite, I have a full guide on that, which you should check out after this, to put +1 or +2 tenacity blessings on all of my items, thus getting me a bunch of damage. To make that damage even more effective, I grabbed a Corroded Mountain Howling, for attack skills are guaranteed to deal double damage when no enemies are nearby. Run away from stuff, stay nice and safe, and hey, do twice as much damage, seemed pretty good. But minus 30% move speed wasn't very cool while clearing. I do still advise the bow if you're going to be taking on bosses and you're comfortable with your ability to blink through mechanics, but most of the time when you're clearing beacons, I suggest a different corrosion. Specifically, the minus 30% move speed corrodes into plus 10%, for a net gain of 40, making you much, much faster and more agile. And then swap to the big gun, or big bow, as the case may be, when you're clearing something much tougher, like a boss. The next cool tech that I'm abusing for this build is Misfortune Watch, and more accurately, every line of text I could find that says every 1 second, or every couple seconds, the next main skill is guaranteed to do blank, because you're only dropping your Arrow Einherjars once every few seconds. In fact, they have a duration for me of about 13 seconds, so I don't have to drop them very often, which means I'm perfectly free to get 100% crit chance with no crit on gear. And by stacking these effects, I'm able to do a lot more damage than I otherwise would be able to. And speaking of, fun fact about sentry skills in Torchlight Infinite, they act as an extension of your character. So if you need any extra healing, you don't need the sentry helmet like I originally thought, you can just regain, and the life is restored to you. And with that said, let's get into the build in a little more detail, starting with the skills. So here I have my Arrow Einherjar. I'm supporting it with Elemental Fusion, simply for the very large damage bonus. Mark, because I found that having it up 100% of the time was far better than sticking it over here on my Magus and having it up a bunch of the time, but not 100%. Wind Projectiles, since faster projectile speed makes the skill clear much more efficiently. Crit Strike damage, because with 100% crit chance it's a massive multiplier. And Multifaceted Guard, because this gives +1 to maximum sentries. I know it doesn't say that. Trust me, it does actually give +1 to maximum sentries, which makes it a 50% more damage multiplier. Absolutely amazing. On my soul candles, I've got some sealed mana so that I can use all my auras, cooldown recovery speed, vertical projectile skill damage, skill effect duration so that I have longer purgatories, for reasons that I'll get into when I talk about my hero traits, and just other random damage mods. My candles aren't that good, I'm working to improve them, but haven't had any luck so far. Then, the rest of my skills are all utility effects, such as Defensive Buffer. The goal of this is just to have extra defenses up 100% of the time, and I'm using Rhythm so I don't have to hit a button myself. Blink, on the other hand, is cost converted, so I can always blink around even if I'm out of mana. And I've got Magic Dash, Quick Mobility, and Periodic Burst to lower the cooldown as much as possible. And then the Periodic Burst is just so that after I blink around, I can drop my sentries for more damage. Burst of Anger provides damage, which procs my chest piece. And overall, it gives a significant attack speed buff plus move speed, so it's great for clearing and makes my sentries shoot faster. Then I've got Archery Bond, which I'm surprised this works with sentries, but it definitely seems to based on me hitting the dummy. So I have another 30% additional attack speed and 10% additional damage. Note, the projectile quantity is not affected by bonuses line, normally a downside. Doesn't matter, because the Einherjar themselves already say the arrows are not affected by projectile quantity bonuses. Moving on to my auras, I've got Precise Projectiles, Thunder Spirit for more speed, and Acuteness Imbue, which is specifically to inflict trauma on enemies, along with providing a bit of damage. Auto Defense with Protection Field, transferring damage over to my minions. Realistically, you can use any other defensive skill here of your choice. And Euphoria on hit, applying Elemental Shock through my Spirit Mages to greatly lower enemy resistances. Now, in terms of soul candles, long term, I absolutely want to keep my main candle that has the cooldown recovery, minus mana for auras, all that stuff. It's awesome, and I highly doubt I'm going to replace it anytime soon. But the other candle is just kind of filler. Skill effect duration is nice, because longer purgatories mean you stay at purgatory's max damage effect for longer. But realistically, I could replace it with anything. And right now, I don't have any skill level scaling, so I could absolutely benefit from that. Ideally, I want something like projectile skill level, maybe even projectile damage. I'm going to keep farming the city of Aeterna, and hopefully I'll get that in the future. And so next up, let's take a look at my hero traits, relics, and memories. Now, the astute among you may have noticed I didn't have a curse. That's because I've got trigger level 28 Scorch on branded enemies. Effectively, I'm auto-cursing everything as soon as I get within radius of it. I also get 17% additional damage recording for my brands. Brands are one of the main ways that you can scale damage on Gemma Flame of Pleasure. For my hero memories, I've gone with a mix of damage and defenses. For example, because I'm using Divine Ember, this is both damage and defense, which is great. And then damage recording for my brand is, well, damage. I've also got converting erosion damage taken to fire. This is probably something that I don't need anymore, but it was very, very helpful when my fire resistance was capped, but my erosion resistance was not. And for every 27% skill area, Purgatory inflicts +1 brand. This is absolutely mandatory. You need this line on one of your hero memories. Any tier of roll seems totally fine, but that way you're frequently inflicting multiple brands. And last up, I've got you and your minions deal additional damage to branded enemies combined with damage recording ratio. This is just any old random damage mods, but realistically it could be max life as well. Then, going over hero traits, Sinful Entangleness basically just enables your brand mechanic triggering death by fire fairly frequently on single target. Scorching Lashes and Groaning Echo go back and forth. Basically, if you don't have much brand recording damage, go Groaning Echo, and if you do, go Scorching Lashes. Burning Depth makes Purgatory automatic. This is really nice, and whatever character picks up at level 50 or so. Then there's Flames of Desire and Scorching Trampling. Again, I've kind of gone back and forth here, but personally I think the brand persistence from Scorching Trampling is really effective when you have a very high brand damage recording ratio. If you don't have that though, Flames of Desire is also pretty good. I've gone back and forth on this tier, and I think it's a mix of personal choice and gearing which one's going to be best for you. Try them both on the dummy, hit it for a little bit, see which one gives you bigger numbers. Last up, Dress Liquor. This is absolutely mandatory. Not only does it give you a massive amount of damage recording, but by making your Purgatory last a lot longer, even if it recovers more slowly, it means your Purgatory is going to be up far more reliably when clearing, which makes the build play much, much, much better. As a quick example here, this is a side-by-side comparison of me using Scorching Trampling versus Flames of Desire. I know it might not make the most sense to be using Scorching Trampling and not investing into fire skill level. Seemed a little bit weird to me too at first. However, it's absolutely been working out, and based on the damage that I've done, I wouldn't have it any other way. So as you can see, both of them are really truly neck and neck. probably to the point where it doesn't matter which one you use, and I kind of wonder if having a couple of accidental or incidental rolls of +1 fire skill gems could just be the way to go and sticking to Scorching Trampling. Either way, doesn't matter too much. If you can get the hero memory that gives you both, then that's even better, as it'll be a massive damage boost. Now, let's take a look at talents and the statue of the new god. First up, God of Machines. This is where you get a lot of sentry bonuses, like Sentry for +1 maximum, and of course, Overly Modified for additional damage. Now, non-sentry active skill damage goes down, but luckily, the only non-sentry active skill damage I'm doing is to myself, so I don't care about this. And I'm pretty much coming across the bottom grabbing all the sentry nodes. If you're wondering why I don't have this, it's because I have 100% sentry crit strike rating without any crit nodes, and I didn't feel like it was worth 4 points just for 50% crit damage. In particular, the node at the end for 16% cast frequency, and also 10% additional damage if a skill hasn't been used in the last 1 second, are particularly valuable and important. Moving on to Machinist, Heat Up is great. Additional damage if the skill was used within 4 seconds. You're probably not going to want to spam your sentry skills just because of this, since Arrow Einherjar gains damage the longer it's been active, but it's something to consider if you have to resummon them, say to reposition on a boss fight. And then Co-Resonance, so that you can apply your own attack and cast speed to your sentry's cast frequency. This is also quite nice. And then, coming across here, skipping the crit nodes, I've both taken and dropped the movement speed nodes in favor of the barrier nodes. This kind of comes down to A, if I can get the special barrier node to gain a barrier when using sentry skills on a Divinity Slate, and B, what sort of content I'm doing. If I'm blasting T7s, you bet I'm going down here, and if I'm doing T8s, something like 8-2, 8-3, 8-4 in particular, then I'm going here for the extra defenses so that I don't die. Also, this +1 sentry is very important, don't skip it. Last up, Warlord, since as a tenacity stacker, you absolutely want Rock for tenacity blessings. And if you don't want to be a tenacity stacker, you've also got Sweep and Wildfire, both of which are powerful options. Furthermore, the sentries tend to focus their fire, pun intended, perfectly for Focus Strike, up to 40% additional single target damage. And I've clicked pretty much every node in the tree here. The only thing that I don't have is the plus fire skill level, since my sentries aren't fire. And this note here, just because I'm level 96, but if I hit 97, I would absolutely take it. The skill radius stuff and projectile speed is great for the build's quality of life, and with Pale Mist Embrace, skill radius does become damage. Now, for Statue of a New God, it's really important to own 1 additional stack of Tenacity Blessing. I got really lucky and also hit 20% additional fire damage dealt. You want to stack these because it is 20% multiplicative damage that will be applied pretty much all the time since your sentry snapshot it. And then my other one, while not nearly as nice, provides a ton of life, which is also damage scaling and life regain that I sorely needed. Having a good amount of regain is absolutely vital for the build's recovery feeling good. I've also got 10% additional sentry damage here. This is absolutely one of my older and weaker Divinity Slates, and I'd be looking to replace it with something like the 20% additional fire damage dealt. But hey, beggars can't be chooser, slates can be expensive, and I happen to roll this, so it's pretty darn good. Speaking of expensive, I'm getting my converts, Fizz to Fire, over on a Fallen Starlight. I did this because these tend to be very expensive and difficult to roll, and rather than wasting my time and money on a slate that could get random junk, I bought it on a Fallen Starlight, because even if I spend 400 or 500 FE to buy this, I can always resell it when I'm done with a build. Now, maybe that only makes it better in my head, but either way, that's my reasoning. And last up, I'm using a Corner of Divinity because I wanted a couple of these gold nodes from vastly different trees, regaining additional life based on missing energy shield. Well, I'm always nuking my energy shield off, and I don't have ES regain, so I really shouldn't have it up at any time, and +1 sentries that can be deployed. The alternative to this would be Cleanse a Dot when you use a restoration skill, and actually going with a restoration skill. Since I don't have one, I did end up dropping that from a build, despite it feeling really good early on. And last up, my Pedigree of the Gods. Got lucky and rolled it with life. And then it has Tenacity, which is an amazing way to generate Tenacity blessings, and +1 max is great. Plus I have Open Wounds. Because I am using a Cuteness Imbue, I'm inflicting trauma 100% of the time. So this is just plus 125% critical strike damage. You don't have to use open wounds. I was just looking for tenacity plus something else good, and this happened to be the most economic option. Tenacity plus anything that gives a lot of damage, perfectly fine. You could go with Focus Strike, you could maybe go with Sacrifice, although that would make you much squishier. It would give you a massive amount of damage. Anything to increase your DPS, or if you feel like you have plenty of DPS and want some defenses, then go for Tenacity plus anything to increase your defenses. And while I'm here, I will quickly go over the pact spirits I'm using. Plaintive Ball of Thread for 8% max life. Explorer Otter Mudstone for, again, 8% max life. Oh, sorry, not 8 earlier. It was 16 earlier. So total of 24% max life from those pets. And finally, I'm going with Flower Whisperer because I always want to be distant anyway. So 16% additional critical strike damage because it's multiplying the 125% that I get from inflicting damage to traumatized enemies with open wounds and everything else that I'm doing. This isn't at all mandatory, by the way, and if you didn't have open wounds, you probably wouldn't want to use this. You just want to use a different generic attack pet. The only thing is you do not want to use Red Umbrella because her damage bonus applies to nearby enemies and you do not want to be near things. And while I haven't tested it, for the same reason, Fog Scorpion could be a bad idea, although if there's no enemies nearby, maybe you still get the attack speed, in which case it's fine. And of course, last but not least, let's talk about the gearing. So I'm using Divine Ember. This means that every tenacity blessing that I have becomes base damage, and stacking life is really, really good. But it also means that I can't restore life or mana if I've gained focus or agility blessing recently, so you don't really want to stack those on this build. Then I've also got a Misfortune Watch. Unlucky crit strike means my crit strike chance is unlucky, but it's guaranteed anyway, so that doesn't matter, and I get 40% crit strike damage. Then I'm also using a Pale Mist's Embrace for the massive amount of life. The skill radius and increases and decreases to skill radius are also applied to area damage. It's a really well-rounded belt, but you could go with something else if you don't really like Pale Mists. Either a two-faced belt for a little bit more damage, or a rare crafted belt for more defenses. For my weapon, like I mentioned, I've got the Mountain Howling, with attack skills that are guaranteed to deal double damage. But alternatively, you could go with a 10% move speed. This one's much faster. This one hits, well, twice as hard. And in theory, you could also have a really fancy crafted weapon, but I haven't found one that's beat my Mountain Howling with the guaranteed double damage, at least so far. Then for the rest of my gear, the template is get as much tenacity as I can, then life, fill in resists, and call it good. I crafted this ring, and this ring, got really lucky and hit the T0 life here. These boots, of course, with the 30% max, gloves, pretty much perfect T1 life, and a little bit of pen. Pen's always nice. And the chest piece, which I'm really happy about, because I have T1 life, T1% life, and 2 tenacity blessings. And again, if you want to know how I crafted any or all of this gear, then do be sure to check out my crafting guide for more information. In fact, I can't remember for sure, but I might have crafted one of these items, or maybe an example item that I didn't end up using because I made something better during the making of that video. So now that you know how the build's mechanics work and how to gear it, how is the gameplay? So I know oftentimes sentries or totems have a bad reputation, but it really isn't bad at all, especially on Gemma Flame of Pleasure. Like I mentioned, most of the time you're dropping a sentry, and pretty much as soon as you've dropped it, it starts firing. Because it starts firing almost immediately, and because it's hitting branded enemies, as everything in your purgatory gets branded instantly, you trigger death by fire, and your clear speed is greatly accelerated. These sentries in particular deal more damage the longer they've been out, so you can just leave them for the full 14-second duration. Note, your duration might vary slightly from mine. Either way, it means you have to use your main skill around once every 10 seconds. You can use it sooner. Just remember, don't spam it because you only get the 100% crit chance and all the damage bonuses if you haven't used it within the last second. Beyond that, I automated almost all of my offensive and defensive skills, so you've got the archery bond and that's it. The build is maybe a little bit low on recovery, which does get me into trouble sometimes, but I have 8% regain, so most of the time it's not an issue. I can stand in the puddles on Trial of Might, generally successfully. but I'd probably want to fix my recovery and maybe add a bit more damage and defenses if I was trying to take on Uber bosses. Though I found that in general, taking on Uber bosses is a particularly unpleasant experience. They go invulnerable and then kill you to some random bullshit damage mechanic. So I don't do it. I stick to the normal versions of the bosses, farm them when they're profitable, do T8 Traveler, that kind of stuff, and mostly build my characters focused on clearing beacons or clearing the city of Aeterna, because not only is that very fun, but it's been quite successful on this build. Unfortunately, I do have a bad history of not reading modifiers and dying just enough that I haven't leveled up much past 96. But on the other hand, if I did the thing all ARPG players dread and read and not take something like take 58% additional damage and lose your blessings and have lower resistances on half of my maps, I'm pretty sure I'd be leveling up without an issue. So if you're looking for a strong, fun, and relaxed playstyle, I can absolutely recommend Einherjar on Gemma Flame of Pleasure. Not only has it been a great mid-game build, but it's scaled extremely well into the endgame. Now, if you're saying, I want to play this, but I don't have a Divine Ember, I personally got lucky and dropped 2 of them fairly early on. If you don't have that, you can absolutely still play the build. I saw several other people on the hero rankings who were about my level and seemed to have about my damage without Divine Ember. Instead, you want to stack a lot of flat damage prefixes on your gear, and then scale it through all the usual things, potentially including Tenacity Blessings, since they're still a really good way to increase your damage. In that case, you probably would have to go Sacrifice, which does make you a little squishier, but you'll get the build up and running no problem. And with that said, if you want to know how I built my character, or maybe just brush up on the basics, I will have a max roll builder in my Discord. Join with the link down below, then react to give yourself both the community and notification roles before heading over to the build link archive and looking for the Gemma Flame of Pleasure build. With that said, I'm curious, have you gotten a chance to try either Forsaken Iris or Gemma Flame of Pleasure? And if so, have the builds you've played so far been successful? If not, are you going to try this one? Let me know down below, or just tell me what the most fun you've had on a build is in the current Torchlight season. With that said, that's all for me today. If you want more content, then you can go over to my second channel and check out my thoughts on the recent PlayStation State of Play, where there's a couple things that caught my eye, but most of it was pretty boring. Before I go, I'd like to take a moment to thank my patrons and channel members for their continued support. Torchlight videos like this one aren't as popular as some of my videos on Path of Exile. They don't get as many views, which also means they don't really make that much money. And because content creation is my full-time job, I'm able to make videos like this one because of the support of patrons and channel members. It means a lot, and if you like seeing content like this, consider supporting. Links will be down below. With that said, thanks for watching, I hope you learned something, and I'll see you again sometime soon.